Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jed Lee, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast, coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so happy that you're part of our Reading with Your Kids family. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you find your podcasts. Our guest today is Mark Gunning. He is going to tell us all about his great middle grade series, I Told You So, The Adventures of William and Thomas. Before we invite Mark in, I need to make sure that I tell you all about our next Reading with Your Kids live event. It is happening November 23rd and 24th on Navy Pier in Chicago. That's right. The Reading with Your Kids podcast is going to be part of the Chicago Toy and Game Fair, the largest toy and game fair in North America. We're going to be displaying a lot of great books. We're going to have a totally interactive booth, too. You can come and find out what it's like to be part of a podcast. And check this out. We're so excited about this. If you use the promo code RWYK, that's our initials, Reading with Your Kids, the promo code RWYK, you can save $3 per ticket when you purchase tickets from ShyTag.com. That's CHITAG.com. That's right. Save $3 per ticket, and you can buy as many tickets as you want by using the promo code RWYK, the initials for the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We hope to see you there November 23rd and 24th. Joining us on the line right now from beautiful Niagara Falls in Canada. He is the author of a great middle grade series. Today we're going to be talking about I Told You So, The Adventures of William and Thomas. Please welcome to the show, Mark Gunning. Mark, how are you?
I am fantastic, Jed. Thank you for having me. I can't wait to talk to everyone.
I'm really excited to have you on. The Niagara Falls area is one of my favorite areas. Of course, the falls itself is just this magnificent part of the world. It is just fantastic. And of course, the city of Niagara Falls, both on the U.S. side and the Canadian side, they're wonderful, but they're really, really different. And we really love as we refer to it here, we love the Canadian side of the falls.
The Canadian side's beautiful. I don't want to say anything bad about the American side. On the one, both sides are beautiful when you're right up by the falls. Mm-hmm. There's so much to do here on both sides. In fact, I was just down in the gorge hiking with my daughter recently. And if you've never been down there, it's a fantastic hike. You can go all the way right down to the water.
Yeah, it's really incredible when you see the power of the falls and the amount, and just imagine the amount of water that is tumbling over the falls like every second, and it's just awe-inspiring.
It's I've grown up here my whole life, mm-hmm. So it's kind of been in my background or my backyard my whole life. And when I was growing up, I actually grew up the upper river above the falls when you travel up towards Chippewa and Fort Erie and Buffalo area. I grew up out there, so some of my stories are going to be based on growing up out there.
Well, speaking of stories, tell us all about the story behind I Told You So, The Adventures of William and Thomas.
Okay, I don't know if you know this, but I'm a grade 3-4 teacher, and I've been teaching for roughly about 20 years now. And it was way back in about 1998, I believe. Kids were reading a book called Captain Underpants.
Uh-huh.
And I started reading it, and I wondered what was the big deal about Captain Underpants. So I took a book home, and I started reading it, and I fell in love with it. And I got thinking, and I said, you know what, I'd like to write stories like that. I have kind of a weird sense of humor, and I thought, what could I come up with? And then I started thinking about some of the things my friend and I did when we were kids. And I used to tell them when I was supply teaching, I would tell them some of the stories about my friend and I. And I found that the students would just be quiet. They'd sit there and they'd listen to my stories. And they'd be like, tell us more, tell us more. And I said, well, if I come back next time, I'll tell you another story. And I started thinking about maybe I should get this down in a book. And so anyways, I got married. My wife and I had 3 children, and life got busy, and I ran into another author. He's a Canadian author, fantastic guy, Michael Wade. I don't know if you've ever heard of Michael Wade. And he writes the And Then It Happened series. And I told him my idea, and he said, why don't you start writing your own books? And that was probably back in about 2010. So between 2010 and 2017, it took me roughly 7 years to hammer out writing the stories, and I self-published. So I created my own company called Ichiguni Books. And I basically did everything myself, did a lot of research, wrote the stories, hired a graphic illustrator, and eventually got everything together and released it in 2017. The stories are short stories about 2 boys, one named William, and he's the mastermind behind all the plans. And let's just say his plans probably aren't the best plans. And then there's his sidekick, Thomas. And Thomas basically goes along with everything, but he sort of tells William, I don't think we should do this. He's kind of got the I told you so response when something goes wrong. And in the first book, there's, for example, one of the stories is called Harry in the Tree. And it's based on a true story where my friend actually got stuck in a tree and he fell upside down. And in the story, if you read it, basically William gets stuck and slowly slides out of his pants. And kids love that story, and they asked me if it's true, and it was a true story. And my friend's dog Harry did come running up, and he thought he was playing. And so some of the stories are like that. Another one's Killer Bees, where they try to take care of a beehive that's in the neighborhood because they're concerned it's going to sting the other kids. And unfortunately, things go wrong. Each story is basically like that, and a lot of them are based on things I did as a kid.
Well, that's really incredible. You touched on a couple of things that I think it's really helpful for us as parents to remember. Probably the most important being how mesmerizing kids get when we tell kids stories about our own past and share stories about our childhood with kids, whether we're talking to our own kids or talking to students in our classrooms, or in my case, if I'm in front of an audience of 300 or 400 kids at my school assemblies, telling them stories about my family and about growing up. Kids love hearing true stories about us.
They definitely do, and every time I think of something new, I share it with my class. That's kind of where I test some of my stories now. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell the kids that when there's a little bit of time at the end of the day, I say, hey guys, I got a story here. What do you think of this? And they just sit there quietly listening. And so I think for them, having their teacher as an author, I think it really shows something. And I've had ones tell me that they want to get into writing. So basically, the whole idea behind my books is to get all the kids that don't like to read, to get them interested in reading by giving them silly stories that sometimes they don't have a message. I know a lot of books have messages about bullying and friendship. My books are more to entertain and get kids reading.
Mm-hmm. And that's incredibly valuable. If we get kids reading books that make them smile, that captivate their interest, that is a great way to help them develop a love of reading, and that will lead to a love of learning.
Exactly. We all know that you need to read to learn everything, well, a lot of stuff, and I just really tell the kids how important reading is, and I have a reading program myself that the kids go home at night and they work on, and sometimes it's a battle with some of them. Some of them don't want to read, and so having fun stories, interesting stories, and stories that are about me actually get these kids that are tough to get to. I actually get them into reading.
Why do you think it is that now we just talked about the fact that it is captivating when kids are learning, hearing stories about their parents, they're hearing stories about their teachers, they're hearing stories about this character that's there presenting an assembly. So we know that that's the case, that kids love those stories. Why do you think it is that kids love hearing stories about the adults that are important in their lives?
Jed, that's a great question. I think because kids nowadays, they're so into video games. Mm-hmm. I think that they don't get the experiences that I had. Like I said, I was lucky. I grew up in Niagara Falls along the Parkway. So I was up by the river. I had the river as my playground, right in my front yard. We had a farm. So I grew up on a farm. And I learned a lot just from my dad, from the farmhand that was there. I learned so much. And when I tell stories, a lot of the kids can't really relate to what I'm talking about. So I think they find everything very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Now, I love the fact that this whole journey of yours was at least in partly inspired by Captain Underpants. My son loved Captain Underpants, and he devoured the stories. And it was one of those series that he and I read together out loud. Even though he was a fantastic reader by the time he met Captain Underpants, we still that was one of the series we loved reading aloud together. And one of the things that was really brought us a huge smile to my face is when my wife and I were in Panama last year. We went into a bookstore, and the book that we found kind of spotlighted in this Spanish language bookstore was Captain Underpants in Spanish. And I wish I remember how you said underpants in Spanish. I don't remember. But that was so great, and I immediately took a picture and sent it to my son.
Oh my gosh, that's my son was a huge Captain Underpants fan. He still has all the books too. He's going into grade 9, but he still has them sitting around. And I used to take them and I would read them myself later on. Fantastic books. Also, Wimpy Kid is another big one that obviously everybody knows about, the Wimpy Kid series. I've had some people talk about my books to me, and they said my books remind them of Diary of a Wimpy Kid, and that they really enjoy reading them with their son or daughter. They actually, one mom said her son's not allowed to read them until the dad comes home, because he wants to hear what's going on.
Hey, that's really, really high praise to have your books compared with Diary of a Wimpy Kid. That's fantastic. Congratulations. I'd love for you to talk, especially as a teacher, about the importance of us continuing to read with our kids who are in 3rd, 4th, 5th grade and above. We all know that it's important to read with our little ones, but we forget sometimes, once kids start reading on their own, we forget that there's still great value in continuing to read with our 8, 9, 10-year-olds. Can you talk a little bit about the value you see as a teacher?
I think the biggest thing with reading is parents need to read with their children. They need to sit down with them, see what they actually are interested in. The books don't always have to be a serious book. It can be a funny book. Some kids love nonfiction, and then you have a lot of kids that love the fictional. My son reads a lot of humorous books, and so that's kind of the area that I focused on. I just see that parents need to actually see how their kids are doing. They need to ask questions, not just listen to them read, but actually talk about the book. Say, what did you like about the book? Was there a message in the book, or what was the theme? I think that's the big thing nowadays, that a lot of the parents, I think, just feel so stressed out from work, and that they need to set aside the time, even if it's 10, 15 minutes a night. Just reading with their child, I think, does wonders for everything. And I promote that every day in my classroom. First, as the kids are going out the door, I say, don't forget, you got to take home your reading books. And some of the parents have come in and said, thank you so much for pushing this. And I do what I can, but I tell the parents it's up to you too. You got to help out as well. You need to show that you want to actually be a part of their learning experience as well.
I think that's real important what you just said there at the end, that it's really important for parents to be part of the education process. We say here a lot of times on the podcast that parents are the first and most important teacher in their kids' lives. And a lot of times, people will say, well, yeah, I can dig that they're the first teachers, but they're not the most important teachers. They might be terrible role models. And I always come back with, well, yeah, I didn't say that they were the best teachers. They're the most important teachers because, if they're teaching, if they're bad role models, then that's what they're teaching, and that's what the kids are experiencing for a long, long time. So we need to remember that as parents, our kids look up to us. They want our approval more than anybody else in the world. And so it is so important for us to be a part and be a conscious part of their education throughout their entire lives.
Definitely. I think we as parents, like I said, I have 3 children myself, and we led by example. As we sat, we would read with them every night. I loved reading with my son with all the humorous books that he had. My daughter, she was really, one of my daughters was into the Warrior Cat series. I had to keep taking her to the bookstore every week to get her a new Warrior book. And I don't know how many times I went to the bookstore, but parents need to just spend a little more time with their children and getting them into reading. And I think my kids see me reading all the time. I'll read books, so it's not like they don't know what books are, and they see them at school all day long. It's something that parents really need to make sure that they have their kids involved in reading. And if it's not every day, try to set a goal of every other day.
One of the things that you were talking about is that, parents these days, they are super stressed. There's a whole lot of stuff going on in their lives, and that's something that keeps them from reading with their kids. But in my experience, I found that as hard as it was it's kind of like exercising. There's some mornings you wake up and the muscles are achy and you don't want to go to the gym. But if you push yourself and you push yourself past that pain, pretty soon you're really happy. At the end of the workout, you're really happy that you pushed yourself and you got to the gym and you did that. I found that on those days when I came home and I was super stressed and super tired, but I still sat down and read with my kids, that was it recharged my batteries. It was a great way to de-stress and to just relax and find some happiness in the day.
You hit it right. You've hit the point right on. It's even though you're so stressed out, just coming home at the end of the day and finding that time so you can sit down with your child. I know there are some of the kids at my school and other kids I've talked to, they love playing video games and they play with their parents. And I've asked kids sometimes when I'm doing some book signings or anything like that, I just say, how often do you read with your parents? And then usually the parents sometimes look at the child and they kind of snicker. And I said, you guys should go home and read this. And I go, let me know. Tell me what you think. And I've had people contact me later and they said, thank you so much for getting me more involved with my child and what they're reading. Because parents don't realize that at the early ages, children struggle and then they pick up, and once they start picking up, the growth is incredible. And it's like anything. If you don't practice it, you start to lose that skill, and you've got to keep maintaining that. So that's why I think reading daily is something that all parents need to focus on their children doing.
And one of the things that you mentioned early on is the importance of reading with those kids who are struggling, or with the kids that many people call reluctant readers.
Yes.
Talk a little bit more about that and about the importance of reading with that audience.
I think with reluctant readers, that's kind of what I brought my books out for. My books they're for likely the grades 3, if you're a high grade 3 level reader, grade 4, 5, 6. I come across reluctant readers every year. That's part of my job, and somehow I have to get through to them. Sometimes they struggle with the reading. They actually have a lot of difficulties. Sometimes they just don't like reading. And so to reach out as a parent, you need to find out what your child likes. Not every child is the same. So for somebody that loves, say, Captain Underpants and Diary of a Wimpy Kid, or even my books, that's not the same thing that's going to get another child interested in stuff. For example, nonfiction. I see a lot of kids that get into dinosaurs and airplanes, and even the war books. I see some students that really get into it, and it's nice to see them spread beyond just one genre of book. So I always try to promote the kids at school, once they've read, say maybe they've read 5 Diary of a Wimpy Kid books, I'll say, you know what, how about this week? Let's try something different. Let's try this book. So I'm always giving kids different books and having them go home and try. And I said, you know what, you go home and try, give it a shot, read a chapter, come back and tell me. Sometimes they come back and they say, you know what, that was awesome. Do you have more of these books? And sometimes I just have to say, okay, that didn't work out. Let's try another book. And so hitting the reluctant reader, that's kind of where my books come into play, in that kids that don't like to read, especially some of the boys like silly stuff. And they want something that's easy to read, and they want something that's short. And that's why my stories are all short. They're short, funny stories, and there's always something goes wrong. And I think the silliness is kind of helps get some of those reluctant readers on board.
Absolutely. And I love the fact that you're trying things with kids, and you're asking kids to try things and to see if you like it. And I think that's really empowering when we are asking kids, do you like this? Can you try this? We're empowering, because we're giving them the ability to come back and say, I didn't really like that. And we're letting them know, well, that's okay. But that's the wonderful thing about reading, is that there's so many things to read about. If you don't like reading about dinosaurs, well, maybe you'll like reading about airplanes, or maybe you'll like reading about history, or maybe you'll like silly things that have a lot of jokes that center around flatulence. Who knows? But there's something out there, and letting a kid know that they have the power to find that thing that they love, and that it's okay for them to be different. That I think that's incredibly powerful.
Oh, definitely. Just the whole message that you have is wonderful. I wish I had known about you sooner. Sean was the one that kind of brought it up and said, hey, have you ever checked this website out? And I went on and I looked and I said, this is fantastic. And when I get back to school this year, I'm going to be sharing it with all the parents in my class, and just tell them, it's a powerful thing to read, and how much information that we can learn. And not always just reading a book, but even reading books online or ebooks. There's so many things out there that these kids can get their hands on nowadays.
And one of the things that, and I made a real mistake, even though I supported my son and got him the comic books and bought him graphic novels, I didn't really celebrate the fact and understand the fact that kids who were reading comics and graphic novels, they're reading. I would oftentimes go into the room as he's reading his 5th or 6th graphic novel, and I would sit there kind of exasperated and say, could you please read a book that doesn't have a picture in it? but I know now, and I want to remind folks now that the kids who, if your kids love graphic novels, that's cool because they're still reading.
Yeah, exactly what you just said. With kids reading, if they're into one thing and they really love it, why would you stop them from reading? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I remember I used to read some comic books once in a while, and my mom would just come in, look at my comic books. I was a huge Mad fan, so I used to read all the Mad, and my mom would just come in, take a look, shake her head, and then walk away. And the sad thing is, I kept all my Mad magazines, and I was pretty fussy, so they were probably like mint condition, most of my books. And unfortunately, my mom threw them out one time. And so I'm like, hey, remember all those Mad magazines I had? And well, I think they made it into the recycle bins.
They'd be worth a fortune now.
Oh yeah, well I'd keep them anyways, but.
Well, tell us what's in store, because I Told You So is a series, or it's intended to be a series. So what do we have to look forward to in the I Told You So series?
Oh, if you didn't know, there's book 2, which came out in 2018. It's called The Journey Continues. And what it does is it just continues the journey of the 2 boys. I am currently working on my 3rd book in the series called Strike 3, You're Out. There's going to be a story about baseball. I'm a huge baseball fan. I'm a big fan of the Toronto Blue Jays. I coach baseball as well. I've been coaching my son's team for a number of years. I played myself when I was younger. Some of the stories that are coming out in the new book, there's going to be one that's called Return of the Ramp. If you've read the first book, you'll know what I'm talking about with the ramp. There's one called The Crazy Pitching Machine. There's another one called The Mummy. And I'm releasing my book hopefully just before Halloween, if all goes well. There's also, I believe there's a story about a whoopee cushion. I used to have a lot of whoopee cushions and pranks when I was a kid, and that's something that William and Thomas loved, pulling pranks. So I've got something in there that I've been working on. There's one called Rock Stars, and it's something about William and Thomas will be turned into rock stars, based on they find an old amp at the side of the road. So that's what's coming out, and I've already started looking ahead to book 4. I haven't even finished book 3, and I'm already starting ideas for book 4 already.
That is wonderful. Well, let everybody know where they can find you online and connect with you online.
Online, you can find me on my website as www.itchygooniebooks.com. I'm also on Facebook. If you look up Mark Gunning, children's author, I'm on Facebook. I'm also on Instagram, and I'm also located on Twitter. I believe my handle would be M Gunning Author. And I actually forget my other handle right now, so that's a little bit embarrassing. I did put it in my new book. I released the 2nd edition of my first 2 books. So I actually was talking to a few people, and they suggested I make a few updates to my books. So after doing a little bit of research, I basically changed them up. Twitter, you can find me at mgunningauthor, and on Instagram, I'm at Mark Gunning, ITYS. That stands for I Told You So.
Well, we are so happy that you came here and told us all about the I Told You So series. Mark Gunning, thank you so much for being part of our show.
Oh, Jed, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this. This is my first time actually doing a podcast like this, so hopefully I can do many more down the road.
Please be sure to join us for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Caitlin Mabry. She is the author of Hi, It's Me, I Have ADHD, a really important book, especially for this time of year. As we mentioned in our conversation with Dr. Ron Malman, so many families start the school year off. They're so excited. This is going to be the best school year ever. And about this time, the beginning of October, when the first marking period grades are starting to come out, families are discovering that their child is struggling in school. Caitlin has a great way for us to look at this and to help our children find success and happiness in school. That's the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. If you are the author of a fantastic children's book, we would love you to be a guest on the podcast. Being a guest, it's fun, it's easy, and it gives you the chance to tell thousands of people about your fantastic book. All you need to do is go to our website, readingwithyourkids.com, click on the contact button, let us know about your great book. We will let you know the next easy steps. I want to thank the people who made today's show so absolutely wonderful. Mark Gunning. Be sure to check out his middle grade series, I Told You So, The Adventures of William and Thomas. I want to thank my producer, Fatima Khan. Be sure you check out Fatima's blog at readingwithyourkids.com. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support that she gives me, and I want to thank you. Thank you so much for being part of our beautiful Reading with Your Kids family. And thank you so much for helping to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking through the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.